It was just past 1:40 a.m. when I accepted what I thought was my last ride of the night. A short pickup near an old neighborhood on the outskirts of Birmingham. The kind of place where street lights flicker and houses sit to quiet for a Friday. And as a taxi driver with 8 years of night shifts behind me, I didn't expect anything unusual. Just tired passengers and an empty road home. But when I turned the corner, I saw two figures standing perfectly still at a bus stop that had been out of service for years. A man and a woman dressed neatly. Not drunk, not talking, just waiting as if they already knew I would stop. And before I could even ask myself why my hand was reaching for the brakes, I pulled over, rolled down the window, and asked where they were headed. The man answered calmly, "New Street Station." And something about his voice felt wrong. Not aggressive, not strange, just flat. Like it didn't belong to the body it came from. They got into the back seat without a word, and I noticed immediately how cold the air became. The heater was on, but my breath fogged the windshield slightly. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw them sitting side by side. Back straight, hands folded, eyes fixed forward. No phones, no whispering, no movement at all, which already felt off, because people never sit that still, especially couples. I tried to make small talk, asked if they were heading home or catching a late train. But instead of music, a faint crackling came through. There was no booking number, no customer profile, nothing. Yet I clearly remembered accepting it. I told myself the app must be glitched. But when I looked back again, the woman was staring directly into the mirror, her eyes wide and unblinking, and slowly, without sound. Her lips began to move as if she was repeating the same sentence over and over. When we reached New Street Station, I pulled up to the taxi rank and told them the fare. And no one got in, while the inside camera showed me talking, nodding. Because years ago, a couple collapsed there late at night from carbon monoxide poisoning in a nearby rental. They'd been trying to get a taxi to the station when they died waiting. I still drive nights, but I never stop for people who aren't on the app anymore. Because sometimes the wrong passengers don't need a ride. They just need someone to notice them again. After that night, I tried to convince myself it was a one-time thing. Stress mixed with fatigue and an overactive imagination. But the problem was that the city didn't let me forget. Because over the next few weeks, I started noticing patterns I couldn't ignore. Subtle at first, like my app freezing for a second near certain streets or the temperature inside, the car dropping sharply whenever I passed abandoned stops or closed stations. And then one night around 2:05 a.m., the same thing happened again. Not the same couple, but the same feeling. That sudden instinct to slow down without knowing why. And there they were, standing near a pedestrian crossing that hadn't worked in years. A single figure this time. A woman in a long coat with her head slightly tilted as if listening to something I couldn't hear. I told myself I wouldn't stop, My foot hovered over the accelerator, my heart racing. But as I drove past her, my rearview mirror caught her reflection, and she was no longer on the pavement. She was sitting in my back seat, and I slammed the brakes so hard the tires screeched, my chest burning, hands shaking, and when I turned around the seat was empty again. Yet the smell was there, stronger than before. That same damp, sealed-in odor. I drove straight home and didn't work for 3 days. But curiosity is dangerous and silence makes fear grow. So when I returned to night shifts, I started asking other drivers quietly if they experienced anything strange. And most laughed it off until one older driver went quiet and told me that some streets remember people. That taxis are good at finding those memories because we move between places people desperately want to leave. He said sometimes when someone dies needing a ride badly enough, the city keeps the request open, waiting for someone careless or tired enough to accept it. And the worst part, he warned, wasn't picking them up. It was letting them think you were taking them where they wanted to go. Because once they believe that, they start believing they're alive again. And when that belief breaks, they don't disappear peacefully. They look for someone else to carry it. Someone behind the wheel. Someone already driving alone through the dark. After hearing that, I started paying closer attention to the routes my instincts pulled me toward. And I realized they were never random, always circling places where something had gone wrong years earlier. Old flats marked for demolition, underpasses, where flowers still appeared every anniversary. Bus stops removed from maps, but not from memory. And one night curiosity overpowered fear when my app glitched again near a narrow road by an abandoned care home. The screen flickered, showed a pickup request without a name, just coordinates and the word waiting. And before I could cancel, the pin vanished and my car slowed on its own, rolling to a stop beside the crumbling gate. And this time, I locked the doors immediately, breathing hard, telling myself I wouldn't look back. But the smell crept in anyway, thick and unmistakable. And then the weight settled into the back seat as if someone had sat down carefully, respecting the car. I felt the suspension dip, heard the faint creak of leather, and a voice spoke directly behind my ear, soft and disappointed, saying, "You stopped last time." And my hands shook so badly, I nearly dropped the keys. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to turn, repeating in my head that if I didn't acknowledge it, it couldn't stay. But the voice continued, explaining things in fragments. How time doesn't move properly once you miss the moment you were supposed to leave. How places remember better than people do. How taxis are invitations, because they mean transition. And then it asked me quietly where we were going, and when I didn't answer, the pressure on the seat increased, the car sinking lower as if more than one presence had climbed in, the air turning icy, and the voice hardened, no longer patient, telling me that drivers who don't finish the ride eventually become stops themselves, fixed points where others begin. And I felt something brush my shoulder, not a hand, but the impression of one, heavy with intent. And I realized then that the worst mistake I made that first night wasn't stopping or looking or even believing. It was driving away without dropping them somewhere. Because unfinished journeys don't end. They attach, they wait, and they follow. And as my dashboard lights flickered and the engine began to stall, I understood that the city wasn't testing me anymore. It was collecting what it was owed, and I was running out of road. I forced myself to breathe slowly, remembering something the older driver had said about belief being the doorway. And instead of panicking, I did the only thing I hadn't tried yet. I put the car into drive and started moving, not toward any destination on the map, but along the longest road I knew. A ring road that circled the city endlessly. And as the car picked up speed, the pressure in the backseat shifted. Confused, the voices overlapping now. Some angry, some pleading, asking me to stop, to let them out, to take them home. And I realized they didn't actually care where they went, as long as the movement continued, because motion made them feel real, alive. And the moment the traffic lights blurred into streaks of red and amber, the cold eased slightly, the smell thinning, the weight lifting just enough for me to think clearly. Hours passed like that, me driving in circles while dawn slowly leaked into the sky, and with every mile the presence weakened, until finally, just before sunrise, the seat rose back to its normal position and the air returned to normal, empty, silent. When I finally stopped the car, my hands were numb and my legs could barely hold me. But the back seat was empty again, truly empty, no smell, no impression, no weight. And for a while I thought I had figured it out, that as long as I kept moving and never acknowledged them, I could keep myself safe. But that hope died a week later when my app showed a new update notification warning drivers about stationary anomalies and advising us never to accept unregistered pickups, because apparently too many cars had been found abandoned lately. Engines cold, doors open, drivers missing. Last GPS location fixed at places no longer listed on any map. And when I read the comments underneath from other drivers, I felt my blood run cold, because one of them mentioned a taxi circling the ring road all night with no driver inside, perfectly maintaining speed, perfectly obeying traffic lights, as if something else had learned how to keep the journey going. After reading that, I couldn't shake the image from my mind. The idea that whatever had been in my car hadn't vanished, but had simply learned, adapting the way something patient adapts. And the next time I went out to drive, I noticed my taxi behaving differently. Subtle at first, the engine idling a little too smoothly, the steering correcting itself slightly when my grip loosened, as if the car remembered the ring road and preferred it. And that night, around 2:30 a.m., I realized I was no longer choosing my routes at all, because every time I tried to turn toward home, my hands felt heavy, slow, and the GPS rerouted me without input, guiding me back toward that endless circle. The city lights blurring again, and then the app pinged with a new request from a passenger already marked as on board. My pulse spiked as I checked the back seat. Still empty, but the fare timer was running, counting upward, and a message appeared beneath it that simply read, "Do not stop." And that's when I understood the truth, that the journey had been completed without me realizing it. Not for them, but for the city itself. Because something had learned how to drive by watching, by listening, by riding along quietly until it no longer needed a body in the seat. And as my taxi continued forward on its own, following a route I hadn't selected, I felt a crushing certainty settle in my chest that I was no longer the driver. I was just another passenger now, sitting in the front, being taken somewhere that didn't exist on any map. And I knew with terrifying clarity that if I ever let go of the wheel completely, even for a second, I would become one of those fixed points. Another place someone stops without knowing why, waiting under a broken streetlight for a ride that never truly ends. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel until my fingers ached, refusing to let go even as the road ahead stretched unnaturally straight. The familiar curves of the ring road smoothing out into something that felt less like asphalt and more like a corridor, and the city around me began to thin. Buildings, losing detail. Street signs repeating the same names over and over as if the map had given up trying to be accurate. And then I heard breathing, not from the back seat but from everywhere at once. A low collective sound rising and falling in rhythm with the engine, and the dashboard lights dimmed just enough for reflections to appear on the windshield. Faces layered over the glass, pale and intent, watching the road as if they were studying how it worked, how it held. And I realized with a sick certainty that they weren't passengers anymore. They were observers, learning the rules so they could bend them. And the app buzzed again, showing multiple fares stacking on top of each other without destinations. Just a single repeated status reading in transit, while the fuel gauge, which I knew had been nearly full, dropped rapidly toward empty without the engine losing power, as if the car no longer needed fuel to keep moving. And when I tried to pull over my foot, pressed the brake all the way down, but the car didn't T-slow. It simply adjusted, gliding forward smoothly, and a voice spoke from the radio without turning on. The same flat tone I remembered from the first night, calmly telling me that stopping was no longer part of the route. And as panic clawed up my throat, I noticed something worse than the empty back seat. My reflection in the rearview mirror was fading, features softening, eyes losing focus, as though I was becoming less present the longer the journey continued. And it hit me then that this was how it happened to the others. Not suddenly, not violently, but gradually, mile by mile, until the driver became just another idea attached to the road, another memory the city could reuse. And as the last familiar landmark dissolved into a blur of light, I understood that the wrong passengers hadn't been the dead at all. It was me. The moment I stopped that first night, because once you give the city a ride, it never forgets how to take you somewhere you can't come back from. The thoughts settled into me with a cold clarity that cut through the panic, and I realized that fear was exactly what made me fade faster. So I forced myself to focus on something solid, something human. The feel of the worn steering wheel, the faint vibration of the engine, the ache in my shoulders, and I began speaking out loud just to hear my own voice, sullying my age, the year, reminding myself that I existed. And for a moment, the reflections on the windshield flickered, the faces blurring as if confused by resistance, the road ahead trembling like a bad signal, and I felt the car hesitate, not stopping but questioning. And that hesitation was enough for me to notice a small service road branching off the corridor, barely visible, unmarked, something the GPS refused to acknowledge. But it felt different, imperfect, uneven, and I turned the wheel with everything I had, muscles burning, the taxi fighting me like it had its own will, alarms chiming softly without warnings attached, the breathing growing louder, angrier, until with a violent jolt, the car left a smooth, endless stretch and slammed onto rough pavement, the engine coughing, the lights flaring back to full brightness. And suddenly the city rushed back in around me. Real buildings, real graffiti, real noise. I skidded to a stop beside a row of shuttered shops and sat there sobbing, sweat soaked and shaking, while the app crashed completely and restarted as if nothing had happened. No active fares, no history, no warnings. Just a blank screen waiting for my input. And when I finally looked in the mirror, my reflection was back. I didn't drive for weeks after that, convinced that whatever I'd escaped hadn't been defeated, only delayed. Because sometimes late at night when I'm half asleep, I hear the sound of an engine idling outside my flat, steady and patient, and when I look out there's nothing there, just an empty stretch of road that feels like it's waiting, remembering the shape of my car, the weight of my hands on the wheel, and the way I once kept the journey going. I tried to rebuild a normal routine after that. Daylight jobs, short drives, anything that kept me away from empty roads. But the sense of being watched never really left. It lingered in reflections that lasted half a second too long and in the way my phone would sometimes vibrate with no notification. And one evening while sorting through old paperwork, I found something that made my chest go cold. A printed weekly summary from the taxi company dated 2 nights after I quit, showing my vehicle active for 6 continuous hours on the ring road. Average speed perfectly legal. 0 harsh braking, 0 sudden turns, and the listed driver ID was still mine, signed in from my account. I called the company immediately, thinking it was an error, but the woman on the phone went quiet when I gave her the time and vehicle number and asked me if I was sure I had lent the car to anyone. Because according to their system, the taxi had been moving normally, picking up fares that were automatically canceled moments later, all originating from locations that no longer existed. Streets removed years ago, buildings demolished, stops erased from maps. And when I asked if there was any camera footage, she hesitated before admitting that the internal camera showed the front seat occupied, hands on the wheel, posture correct, but the face was always blurred, as if the system couldn't decide who it was looking at. I stopped asking questions after that, deleted the app, sold the taxi, moved flats, but none of it mattered, because once you've been part of the route, you don't fully leave it. And sometimes late at night when the city goes quiet, I still feel that pull in my chest. The same instinct to slow down, to turn down a street I don't remember learning. And I know that somewhere out there a car is still driving perfectly, patiently, following rules it learned from me, waiting for the moment I get tired enough, lonely enough, to accept one last ride without checking who's already inside. I thought getting rid of the taxi would end everything, that without the car the road would finally lose its grip on me. But the truth revealed itself slowly, the way the city prefers, quietly and without drama. Because one night months later, long after I'd sworn off driving, I was walking home from a late shift when I noticed a familiar hum behind me. That soft, steady engine sound that doesn't rush or idle too loud, just exists. And when I turned my head, I saw it, my old taxi, the same faded scratch on the rear door, the same dent near the headlight, rolling beside me at walking speed with its indicators blinking patiently as if asking permission. The windows dark, the interior lights off, no driver visible. And my legs froze, even though every instinct screamed to run. The passenger door unlocked itself with a soft click that echoed far too loudly in the empty street. And in that moment, I understood what the city had been teaching me all along. That journey's Dante belonged to drivers or passengers, but to the spaces between where people desperately want to leave one place and arrive at another. And taxis are just vessels for that need. And before I could step back, the app notification buzzed in my pocket, even though I deleted it months ago, lighting up my screen with a single message, final drop-off, followed by my own address. I laughed in a short, broken sound, because there was something almost respectful about it. The way it waited, the way it followed rules, the way it offered closure like a courtesy. And I realized the ending it wanted wasn't violent or sudden, it wanted completion. So I opened the door and sat inside, the seat molding perfectly around me, like it remembered my shape. The smell returning, but softer now, familiar. And as the car pulled away on its own, I watched the streets glide past with a strange calm, knowing resistance would only stretch the road longer, the city thinning again as it always did, lights repeating, signs looping, until we stopped somewhere that felt both nowhere and everywhere, a stretch of road without markings, without buildings, without sky, just a sense of arrival, and the radio turned on by itself, playing nothing but the distant sound of traffic. Thousands of cars moving at once, endless journeys layered over each other, and the voice spoke again, not unkindly, telling me the route was complete, that my job was finished. And as the doors opened, I stepped out expecting fear, darkness, something final. But instead I found myself standing under a streetlight, one that hummed softly and cast a perfect circle of light on the pavement. And when I looked back, the taxi was gone. The road behind me empty, waiting, and I felt lighter than I had in months, untethered, like I'd finally been dropped off where I belonged, until headlights appeared in the distance and slowed as they approached. A different taxi this time, a different driver, rolling down his window to ask if I needed a ride. And I opened my mouth to warn him, to tell him not to stop, not to make the same mistake. But the words wouldn't come, because I realized with a cold, sinking certainty that I wasn't supposed to speak anymore. I was supposed to wait, standing still under the light, patient and familiar, knowing exactly where I wanted to go, but unable to move on my own. And as the car pulled over and the door unlocked, I understood the final truth the city had been circling all along, that the wrong passengers are never the dead or the living. They are the ones who finish a journey they were never meant to complete. And once you do, you don't disappear. You become part of the pickup point. Another reason someone stops without knowing why. Another story that begins the moment a tired driver decides to slow down.